Hi, I'm John Ficarra. Welcome to Ficarra Classic. I'm here with the illustrious mechanic Matt. Say hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
There we go. We're going to give you an update on what's going on in the garage. The 928's fuel system is in. We're going to show you that. We've got the 914, which we got the carbs tuned, and we took it for an alignment. At the end of the video, I'm going to tell you all about what an alignment is. And you might notice there's another car over here that's not the Devitt car. All the Devitt car is done being swapped. And what is that, Matt? You see, C4 Corvettes only earn a grunt from Matt. And there's a reason for that. We'll be getting to that in another video. But for now, let's dive in and take a look at what's going on in the garage. All right, so let's start with the 928. We haven't done a whole lot since the last video, but we did do the entire fuel system as far as the hoses front to rear, making sure that all those old, ancient, decaying hoses were nice and fresh. We don't have to worry about a fire in the back. We did put in the fuel tank, and this fuel tank is actually pretty awesome because it's plastic. And back in 1978, that was really high tech. In fact, the earliest plastic tank I could find was the 1973 Volkswagen Passat in a production car. And that means the Germans were kind of already working with this technology. Now, plastic tanks are safer than metal tanks in impacts. They're also much lighter, and they can be molded to take up whatever space you need. So this tank has a really bizarre shape, and it goes way up into the back and tucks in the little corners. So you can get a very large tank in a very small area. And this has a very large fuel tank because it's a GT car. It was designed to drive long distances across Europe without having to fill up too many times. So this was really cool stuff, and it took decades after this for the rest of the auto industry to start building cars with plastic fuel tanks. So the 90s was kind of really when it started picking up speed, so 20 years later. Now, these were safer in an impact, safer than, say, at the same time in the 70s you had the issues with the Ford Pintos and Mercury Bobcats. What people don't hear about a lot, or the pickup trucks from General Motors, they had a huge lawsuit of over, I think, $500 million they paid out for those trucks exploding. And more recently, the Ford Panther platform, which is what we've known as the Crown Vic or the Mercury Grand Marquis, they had issues with rear impacts because their fuel tanks were, and this was always the bad thing to put it, you take a fuel tank and you put it between the rear axle and the back of the car, and guess what gets hit first as an impact? Now, I know you're already saying, this is between the rear axle and the back, but it's a plastic tank. They deform an impact. I do really, really well in direct hits. 928s have no history of any kind of issues with the tanks going up. But the Crown Vics did. In fact, if you find some old cop cars, they had a fix for it. If you sat in the driver's seat, up in the center console was this big red button. And you push that red button, and there was a fire suppression system built into the car that would spray over the fuel tank in a rear impact because they had lost a few officers in these rear impacts. Cop cars are exposed to rear impacts a lot more than anybody else because they're parked on the side of the road during traffic stops. So Ford tried to fix it by, they had a reinforcement kit for the rear, but this really cool button. So we in film cars, you sometimes see old retired cop cars with these holes up there. That was for the fire suppression system. I'm getting off track, but I think that's a really cool fact. So that's what we've done to the 928. We're hopefully going to start it up soon now that all the fuel's into it. We're going to hear what this fantastic exhaust sounds like, which I'm really excited about. Now, over here, we've got the 914, and the 914 made it to Luftgekühlt. Thank you to Patrick Motorsports and to everybody else who helped provide parts and get everything done in time. Matt put in this monstrous 12-hour day the night before, and we got it all cleaned up and ready. Rolled into Luftgekühlt. People dug it. We had a great parking spot. We talked to people all day. It was great meeting a lot of you at Luftgekühlt. And if you haven't been to a Luft event, I highly recommend it. It is kind of this just Porsche fantasy land with all kinds of fantastic race cars and street cars. And I think the best part about it is the amount of individually owned cars, like things not from private collections, but just the guy down the street suddenly shows up and he's got this slant nose 930 or something. It's a fantastic event, and this was a great car to take to it. Now, what we did yesterday was we went on a little field trip with the 914 First, we stopped at Tom Amon's shop here in Grass Valley, who is one of the great 911 mechanics. And we had him breathe on the engine a little bit. He was the one who did the final assembly of this motor, and he went in and tuned the carburetors. It's amazing when you get these carburetors in tune, the difference in the way the engine sounds and it runs. It's fabulous. And he's been doing this for 40, 50 years. So he just gets under there and by the feel, a little bit of this, and runs great now. So we're just right on target for taking this to a track day. The next step yesterday was to take it and get it aligned. Now, we didn't have any alignment specifications for the car. All its old sheets were gone, so we didn't know what the setup was for it. So we reached out to a few friends who had 914 race cars, and we got a kind of general idea of where we wanted to be. So we needed a base alignment. So we went down to Sacramento, Kelly Custom Alignments. They helped us out. We put it on the rack, and we got a base alignment. Now, these cars were never designed stock for the kind of extreme angles the alignment needs for a race car. And back in the day, they didn't have like the modern kind of these top hats and things that you could use to change the alignment that you can buy off the shelf. Back then, all they would do is get out a saw and hack at the original body and open it up so that you could lean this top of this strut in farther to get more camber. And that's all this is. They just drilled it out, hacked it out, and leaned it in. Because we're trying to get at the front, we're trying to get about 2 degrees of camber, and at the back about 2.5 degrees. And then we're also worked on the caster and the toe. Now, what are all those things? Now, a lot of people go to alignment shops and you hear all those words and you see their little sheets when they're finished with them. But what does it mean? And how does it affect a race car? To explain that a little better, let's go to the workbench. Okay, so this is the little sheet that you usually get. They have like a before and after, all the degrees. And really doesn't tell you a whole lot unless you know what those numbers mean. So we're going to look at 3 different elements of the alignment. Now there's a lot more, and it's pretty complex. We've got a lot of angles, and the angles are always moving and changing as the suspension moves up and down. But the simple ones are toe, camber, and caster. So toe is basically the 2 wheels on the front, okay, and it also on the back. So we have toe. All these adjustments are done for the front suspension and the rear suspension. Toe is when the tires turn in. This is toe in. So the tires are kind of in. As it goes down the road, they're kind of pushing in on themselves. Toe out is out. So they're kind of duck walking down the road. Now, why would you want to have either of those? Why wouldn't you want 0? So most cars have just a little bit of toe in like that. And what that does is higher speeds, it makes it more stable. And also, for most street cars, your suspension moves a little bit because it is on rubber bushings. So as you move faster, that little bit of toe in actually, as you start driving faster, might go to 0, which is no drag, no scrub. You'll hear that term scrubbing. And what that means, if you have a lot of toe in, these 2 tires want to go this direction, but you're going that direction. So it's scrubbing like that, and it's slowing you down just a little bit, but not a lot. Now, for a race car, it depends on what kind of race car, so I'll qualify with that. This is for road racing on a track. For autocross, you do it a little bit different for different kinds of racing, but for what our purposes are, we want a little bit of toe in because we want that high speed stability. Now, you can do toe out. What that does, say you're doing autocross, you want, instead of high speed stability, you want the car to dart into a corner really fast. So that tire, if you're turning right, is already turning right a little bit, and it will fly right into that corner. Now, that's a little twitchy at high speeds because the car's a little unstable. So our car is going to be going down, Laguna Seca or Sonoma or the straightaways, and we want to make sure that it's relatively stable. We give a little bit of toe in, and that can be measured by degrees. Now, you'll see guys out there with pieces of string, and you could do a string alignment for toe pretty easily. And they'll talk about like an 1/8 inch of toe, and that means it's turned in across the whole thing about 1/8 of an inch, and that's what we're running the front of this. Just a little about 1/8 inch of toe in. Now, you're going to do the same thing for the back. Toe in the back is going to keep it relatively stable at high speeds, and we definitely want that, especially with the engine towards the rear of the car. Toe out in the back is really rare. Now the reason you'd want to have toe out is if you wanted to have a lot of oversteer. That means the rear end's going to go woo on you. But very, like, to the inexperienced or even the experienced, that is twitchy and dangerous. So we also are going to do a little toe in on the back, about the same amount, about 1/8 of an inch of the back. So that's toe. Now the other one, you'll see, and this is the one people know a lot because it's the most visual you'll see, and that is camber. Camber is the vertical element of the wheel, and if it tilts in like that, that's negative camber, and if it tilts out, that's positive camber. Now, if you look at race cars like the 30s and the 20s, they're actually out like this. They have positive camber, and it looks crazy, but for the suspensions they had in the day and the tiny little thin tires, that worked for them. You'll never see that anymore today. Everything's going to have some sort of negative camber. Now, why is that? You know, everybody always thinks if it leans in too much, you're going to wear out the inside of your tires. This isn't doing anything. Now remember, this is a race car, so it's turning a lot of the time and under heavy loads. So you'll tilt these in, and as the car's weight shifts, you'll lighten this wheel. So that's tilted in, but it's not going to have a lot of pressure on it. This tire that's loaded is going to be flat. And the advantage is, if you're getting a lot of load over there, and you'll see, this is called tripoding, you'll see a car go into a corner and it will lift. That inside tire will actually come off the ground if the car is a really stiff chassis. It's really going through the corner. It's a beautiful effect. Drifters do it all the time. I mean, you'll see these kind of crazy tripoding things going on. But back in the day, in the 60s, you'll see great shots of Jim Clark out there with a Lotus Cortina with 3 wheels on the ground. So what you're looking for is that the outside tire that's doing all the work. You want that as flat and square and as much grip on the ground as possible. So we tilt in, and we go into the corner, that tire goes flat. This has all the pressure on it. This one's not doing a whole much, so you don't have to worry about it leaning in. And that's the reason for camber. Now, you can get really extreme. If you look at open-wheeled race cars, it's pretty obvious. You'll see Formula One cars. You can really see them when they come out of the pits, especially if they're in a race like Monaco where they're in a street race and it's a lot of tight corners. They'll lean those suckers in like that, and you're like, why aren't the insides wearing out first? It's because they're laying flat. The tire that's under load is laying flat most of the time. And if you drove your street car like that all the time, where you're driving straight most of the time, yeah, you're going to wear out the insides. So we're going to run at the front of this car, if we can get there, about 2 degrees. Now, even though that front end's hogged out, we're still only, I think, at like 1.8. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work. We'll see how 1.8 works, but as a baseline, we'll see if we can get maybe a little bit more out of the front of that car. Now, at the back, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to have that leaned in. Now, depending on the car's balance, front engine, rear engine, how it's set up, it really affects how much camber you put into it. We're putting 2.5 degrees in the back, which is a little bit more. Now, those are wicked wide tires you probably saw in that car. The width of the tire doesn't change what the camber is. So like if you go to a wider tire, you're not going to go to a different degree. That's just always going to be the same thing because you're talking about getting that tire to lay flat on the asphalt. Now, if you're drag racing, and you're going to want these suckers sitting flat on the ground. So there's a trade-off in a race car for straight line acceleration, and so how much traction you're going to get as opposed to how much traction you get in the corners. Now, for road racing, you're going to win and lose most of the races in the corners, especially if you don't have a terribly powerful car. So that's camber, and it gets more complex than that, but that's the simple version. Now, caster is the kind of the mysterious one where people really don't know what the hell that is. And that's hard to explain. So caster is if you have like the front wheel of your bicycle and it has a fork on it, right? And you have goes like that. The end of your fork, that front of that tire is always in front of the bike. And that distance from here to here is your caster. And what that does is that is what makes the wheel, we let go of the wheel and the car wants to go straight. A lot of caster is going to force the car to go straight. It makes it very stable at high speeds or even any speeds. But it makes the steering, the more caster you have, the more difficult it is to steer. So we're going to be running, you know, we got it set at 5 degrees, which might be a little too much. We're not really sure, but it's a good place to start. You know, we might back that off for like an autocross car. You might back it off to like 3 degrees. So that distance, basically, your bicycle fork distance is getting closer to the center line of the wheel. And it makes it a little easier to steer, but it won't self-correct as much. But in autocrossing, you're cranking it back and forth. Going down the racetrack at 100 and something miles an hour, you want that to track out. I don't know if you've ever like spun the wheel and then let go and it'll spin back to center. That's caster. Pretty simple. So those are the 3 elements of a basic alignment. Now there's Ackerman angle people talk about a lot. There's bump steer. We'll get into that later. Those are a lot more complex. But that is the kind of base alignment we got for this car. We got out there, we got the caster, the camber, and the toe set. Now we'll take it to the track, and you'll see guys at the track looking at the tire. You'll get a temperature of the tire, but you also want to get the temperature, you'll see them get the temperature of one side, the center, and the other side, because then they'll know if the whole contact patch is being used. If this side's super cold and this side's super hot, you don't have the alignment just right. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to be taking it out, measuring the temperatures, getting ourselves closer and closer to whatever a perfect alignment is for this car, and then we'll build a history for that, and it will change from track to track, but for the most part, we'll start there, and we'll see how it goes. So I hope that was a nice, quick, easy to understand primer on alignments. Next video, we were going to be going back to an old friend, the 6-wheeled Range Rover, and update you on that and where it's going to be, so you can go see it pretty soon. And then a real special one will be after that video. So I got a lot of cool videos coming up. If you enjoyed this one, if you're enjoying the whole series, please again, like, subscribe, tell your friends, help me build the channel. It's been great talking to you today. Have a good one.